not only are we coming up to the time of year when we have the most sunlight and would make, of course, any solar guy happy and solar panel owner happy. We're also in a time when energy prices are skyrocketing, and we're trying to sort of ease away from a whole lot of our fossil fuel energies, and solar has become a huge business. I notice as I go through my neighborhood, I'm seeing more and more houses that have solar panels on top of them. My friend Dan Dean with EWC, because I can't remember the name of it now, EWC is the solar guru in this area. And we've had him on recently. We were talking about geothermal, which is another one of his specialties. And I said, Dan, would you please just come and talk to us about solar, because there's a lot of questions and a lot of people getting solar. So welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you letting me be here, Alex.
Yeah, it's really great. So you have it's Earthwise Constructors. Sorry. I'm having a problem with names this morning. You know, some days you just have a blank brain day, and that's kind of most days for me at some point, but today it's early. So we were going to talk about the 5 elements of solar, which I thought was a great title for this discussion. And is this something that you would talk to your potential clients about?
They are things that we need to discuss with them so we know how they want to proceed. There's lots of in and outs about solar. I can give a really good example of the question that I received during this big last cold snap when people lost power, and all of a sudden their solar wasn't providing power for their house. They're going, why don't I have power on my house? I've got all this solar, on it. And there's a code called UL 1741 that requires any grid-tied inverter to disconnect and to not provide any power should the grid go down. And it's to protect the linemen who are out trying to repair the lines. It would shock them if you were producing power.
So let's explain that, because that was when we first started putting solar in houses, that was a big question that they were like, well, my solar panel will keep sending power back through those lines. You don't want that if you're not if you're the lineman.
The lineman, that's right.
And
it's
so
dangerous.
what we're saying is there is a switch basically in the system that Dan is saying turns it off. It's just like a light switch. It just turns it off, so the current stops.
And it cannot produce power.
And it can't produce power.
Now there are ways to get it to produce power. It's called islanding, and we'll talk about that in a minute.
Okay.
It's one of the elements we have to discuss.
And so I think that's great. So we just had this cold again, freeze-ageddon.
Really?
And it was bad. It was super bad. There were people that were without power for weeks, actually.
That's right.
And we were at sub-zero for many days. And so there was a lot of damage done, and a lot of people that probably thought that solar panel was going to be their savior.
Their lifeline, that's right.
But it probably couldn't.
It couldn't be.
Yeah.
Not unless they had a system that was designed to be islanded or to be off-grid, so to speak.
So where it isn't connected, where it's sending power where you don't want it to go.
Right. It disconnects from the grid, and it's able to be autonomous. It operates all by itself without the grid.
And that would normally, the reason I asked Dan to be on last time, I wanted to talk about solar or power storage. That was the big reason, and we got off into the geothermal, and the power storage with solar is a huge factor, because people think, they're under the impression that if I just put solar panels up there, I'm going to have power regardless. But you have to be able to store it to use it at night, or when the solar panel is not going to be producing energy.
That's correct.
And that is a big question. Now, I recently did some research on battery storage with the lithium batteries. And it kind of scared me. I mean, you guys have been telling me, you and other solar people have been telling me for some time about some of the issues that they've had with lithium batteries.
Thermal runaway.
They're a lot more complicated than just a lead battery that's in your car. It's just a lot more complicated. Can you explain that in layman's terms?
Real quickly, a lithium battery is a solid chemical energy source. If they are internally shorted by accident, let's say you're in an accident or something, a screwdriver gets poked through the battery, it internally shorts them and they overheat, and those chemicals then catch on fire. It's called thermal runaway, and the one battery will catch on fire, which will heat up the next battery and cause it to explode and catch on fire, and it's a chain reaction. So lithium can be dangerous if you do not handle them correctly. They're a superior technology because there's no memory problems. You can fully discharge them. They'll last for 10 years. They're smaller. They are more expensive.
They're half the weight.
They are much lighter. Yes, they are.
Yeah, yeah. They're expensive now because
Prices
they're so
are
new.
coming down.
Yeah.
They're a lot less expensive than they used to be.
And so one of the things that I kept seeing over and over when I was doing my research is if it catches on fire, don't throw water on it.
Yeah, that's
What-
right.
Tell me what that meant.
Well, water spreads it's like oil. If you put water on
Oh,
oil, it
it's the
spreads it.
chemicals that are
And it
in it.
spreads the chemicals, and the chemicals just continue to burn wherever
Uh-huh.
they run to, because they get part of the water and it carries it off and the fire spreads.
Now, are there kind of rules to keeping it charged or discharged at a certain level so you don't have issues with them?
Well, the charging is definitely important, but the environment that they're in and making sure that they're not damaged is the most important part about
see.
lithium ion.
I see.
The lead acid do not have that problem.
Mm-hmm.
The chemicals do not burn by themselves. So you basically got sulfuric acid in them, and it's not a flammable liquid.
It just eats through stuff.
That's
It's
right. It eats through things.
Just no big deal.
That's right.
So let's talk about the 5 elements of solar.
All right. Well, normally we start out whenever we talk with a homeowner about the solar panels that we're going to be using, and that's very dependent upon the type of roof you have or whether we're going to be ground mounting. There's 3 basic types. There's a rigid panel and there's a flexible panel. There's 2 types of rigid. There is a premium or high performance, and then there's your standard panel. A high performance panel you could get as much as 27% efficiency out of, whereas a standard panel you might get 17 to 19% efficiency.
What does that mean when you say an efficiency?
The sun to electricity conversion, based on any amount of sun, I'm going to convert 19% of that into usable DC electricity, or 27%.
I see.
And in the case of flexible, which is your roll-up types that are being used on standing seam roofs where they fit right between the seams perfectly, not that you can't use rigid, they're only about 6% efficient. So you're spending a lot of money
You're going to have to cover a larger
That's
area
right.
to reach the same amount of
of
energy.
power that you're putting out. That's correct. So that's where we normally start. The rigid panels are what we like to use unless we are, for some reason, really stuck with using curved or flexible because we've got curved surfaces that we're trying to get around.
Yeah, that's really interesting to me.
A lot of technology out there.
They don't, when you're looking at and you see these things advertised, right? Or you see seeing promoted on the internet or whatever, unless you know to look for that stuff, you just go, wow, cool, man, that's cool. They could do that. Man, they can just roll that thing up like a little map.
Right. And it's nice if you're going to go carry it somewhere and take it for portable because it's very portable. And that's the key thing about the flexible. They roll
But
up.
you've got to have realistic expectations about what it's going to provide for you.
Yeah. If you're doing a home, I highly recommend using a rigid, and unless you're just really stuck on first cost, go to a premium panel. They'll produce quite a bit more, and the cost difference is less than the amount of performance they're going to give you. In other words, the cost per performance is better for the premium than it is for the cheap ones, which is your standard.
I see. So, number 2 on our list.
Number 2 is the type inverter we're going to use. This is where that ULT 1741 comes in. If we don't care about having power, if we lose power, and we're just trying to do a net zero scenario where we want to produce as much energy in the course of a year as we consume in the course of a year, then we want to use a grid-tied inverter. So that if we lose power, it will shut off and we will not have power.
So it's tied in. When you say grid tied, you mean it's tied into the main grid everybody else is
literally
used.
connected to the grid. That's
Okay.
correct. And so you can feed energy back into the grid and sell it to the electric company that you're also purchasing electricity from. The other type is a battery-based inverter. Must have at least one battery. It is able to run without the grid present. So if you lose grid, it will start pulling power from the battery. And
So if there's a blackout, you'll still have some power.
you'll still have some amount of power. Now, how much power is going to depend upon that battery and the size of the inverter. They're called off-grid inverters or battery-based inverters. They are tied to the grid because they can charge the batteries while they're tied to the grid, but the load output's completely separate. The load is not tied to the grid, it's only tied to the inverter. That's how, if the grid goes away, they can continue to provide uninterrupted power to your loads, but the grid has completely gone away.
So you've got to manage that power, that output. What are you needing to run? Are you just running
That's right.
lights? You're probably not going to run the air conditioner and the TVs, and it's not like you're going to. I mean, typically
you can run your entire house, and if you have enough inverter and enough battery. One off-grid structures are one of the things that we do, and when we build an off-grid home, we have to have a battery room that is air conditioned, and we have a lot of very heavy batteries to be able to carry even a small house through a winter night, because that's 16 hours of dark and only 8 hours of sunlight to not only power your house, but
recharge
those
them.
batteries.
Yeah.
That's right. So and the battery-based also have a generator backup port so that you can have a generator to charge the batteries in the event that they start running low and you don't have grid present.
it's a big management challenge.
It is.
because you're managing the storage system and the part of the system that provides the energy, which is kind of on your roof and kind of just does its thing. But then when you get to the battery system or energy storage system, you really have to be on top of that.
There's a lot of calculations involved, and that we don't bother the homeowner with that. We figure it all out for you and just say, this is how many you're going to need. Now, batteries are expensive, so be prepared for that.
Yeah,
The battery-based inverters are more expensive, but they work. And we've done 15,000 square foot houses completely off-grid with
Wow.
batteries and inverters. And they can run anything and everything. They never know if they have a battery outage or a power outage.
And that's what I've had homeowners tell me they want. Generally the guys.
Until they
I
see the
do
price.
not want my college football game disturbed.
Right. Buy a little battery backup for your TV. Might be easier.
So what's our next on our list?
Well, number 3 is the batteries. And we talked about that a little bit. We have lithium ion, which is the new technology, and it is a very good technology because it doesn't have memory problems. Memory means that if I discharge a battery only 40% and then charge it back up, and then next time I discharge it 90% and I charge it back up, a lead acid battery will start remembering that.
Right.
And it will not charge up all the way, or it will not discharge all the way. Right. But lithium ion does not have that problem. You can discharge it 90% and recharge it, and it'll never change its memory about how much you can charge it or discharge it. Lithium does cost more. They do have a thermal runaway problem, but that is typically not a problem as long as the room is engineered correctly and the system's engineered correctly and you don't damage them. The liquid batteries, there's 2 types. There's an AGM lead acid battery and there's a flooded cell battery, lead acid battery. The AGM stands for absorption gas mat. It's a maintenance-free battery. It's the type we like to use.
Like a sealed battery?
It's a sealed battery. They're still big and they're heavy, but they're sealed and you don't have to maintain them. Flooded cell you have to maintain, and you're constantly adding water, and the homeowners do not like that. It's the
I've been stranded on the lake many times because I didn't maintain my battery.
The batteries are the lead acid batteries are very resilient. They don't catch on fire. They can be caught in thermal runaway if hydrogen gas is being outgassed and it's not being vented. But that's rare, so that we ever have a problem with it. We normally use lead acid because the cost is so much more affordable than lithium is right now. But both technologies are very viable. Lithium takes a lot less energy. A lot less space to store the same amount of energy than you do in lead acid.
Oh, it's just such a great technology, and I'm really excited for it to become popular enough that the pricing gets more affordable. Let's move on to the solar charge controller.
Okay.
That's our next item.
Grid-tied inverters, those that are not battery-based, have a solar charge controller built into them so that the DC power coming from the solar panels is converted to AC and then goes back onto the grid or provides power to the house. In the event of a battery-based inverter, typically they do not have this solar charge controller in them. It has to be a separate standalone product.
Yeah.
So what happens is the solar panels are attached to the solar charge controller, which then charges the batteries. And then the batteries provide power to the inverter, and the inverter provides power to the load.
So the inverter is what takes the electric current and it converts it to what you want it to be. Whether it's running the house or whether it's just, it comes out of the solar panel, one thing gets converted to another thing to run the house, because they're two different types.
That's correct. Two different types of electricity.
These are all terms that are confusing to
They
people.
are. And DC stands for direct current. AC stands for alternating current. Alternating current is what our houses run on. And DC current is what batteries use and solar panels produce. So we're storing power in batteries, just like a normal battery. It's got a plus and a minus on it. And then we convert that to the AC power that we use in a house.
And so when you're considering doing solar, you have to have this discussion about the converter and the controller, because I mean there's a lot of decisions that you're presenting to a homeowner about these options that they have, that is really kind of cutting edge things that most of us don't understand. And maybe we don't want to understand it. That's why we have you.
Most don't.
So our final point is the grid itself.
Once you have your beautiful new solar system put together and it's all ready to operate, you can't just turn it on and attach it to the grid. You have to actually apply to the people who own the power lines for a PTO, or permission to operate. There is a agreement that you have to fill out. It's called an interconnection agreement with that company. It comes from the company that whoever owns the power lines. That's not your retail provider. It's whoever owns the power lines is who you have to apply to.
And that
usually your installer does this for you if they're aware of it. If they're the one doing the engineering, they'll also make the application. Some do not. They have to have someone else do that for them.
There were a lot of discussions early on in solar, and I think that we started having these discussions. You and I probably met in the early 2000s originally, when we started doing zero energy houses and things like that. And there was a lot of discussion about how the private power providers were going to handle this, particularly the feedback into the grid. Some of them just said, heck no.
Yeah, we don't want it.
We don't want it.
Because we can't handle it.
Right. And then some of them were more receptive and flexible. But I think we were all learning together how this would work, or if it would work. It was very interesting. So the bottom line is, you have to be in touch with your energy provider, or the people that own, not the provider or necessarily the agent, but the owner of the power lines.
Right. And your retail provider can tell you who that owner is if you need to apply for it yourself. Typically, the people installing the solar panels can help tell you who it is or make that application for you. It's a lot easier because there's a lot of technical stuff you have to provide to them, because they want to know whether or not their electric lines are going to be able to handle this power you're selling back to them. And that's another good key point. If you want to sell power back to your retail provider, you're going to have that PTO. You can't even put it online until you have that permission to operate. But then you can also sell energy back to your retail provider once you have that.
And so this is, if you're just going solo and you're not tied into the grid, this isn't an issue.
Right.
But if you tie into the grid, you're actually tying into somebody else's property, basically.
That is correct.
Yeah.
And you have to have permission to operate on their property.
Wow, man.
A lot to it.
There's a lot to it. There is a lot to it. It's always great having you here.
Well, it's always a pleasure.
And
Always fun.
And I guess your world has really changed, like everybody in the solar world has really changed a
has.
lot in
It's
the last
booming.
year. Yeah, yeah.
It's almost becoming standard on some home builders now. They're at least wiring the houses for the option, if not going ahead and installing it for the people. They're offering it as an option to build a house, to have solar installed.
Well, it seems like I'm seeing a lot more now. Are there energy rebates available?
There
for
still
people?
are. There's a 22% tax credit still available if they don't renew it through this year. And then some the electric line owners, not the retail company, but the people who own the power lines, some of them are offering cash incentive to actually install solar, because it means they don't have to build another power plant. You're actually helping them out.
Well, and as we've all experienced really nationally in this winter, it's almost becoming vital, because our power grid is really in distress just from age, if nothing else.
Oh,
But
and
well, I
growth.
tell you what, to fix it is mucho dinero.
We have 20,000 people a day moving to DFW right now, and it's
20,000
impossible.
a
And
day?
It is impossible to build out the infrastructure that fast, and so that's why it's in such distress, and that's why they are so willing to give you cash rebates to put in solar right now.
So leave your pets at home. I'm just kidding. We love pets. It's always great having you here, and we'll do it again soon.
I hope so.
I appreciate it.
Always a pleasure.
Dan Dean with Earthwise Constructors, EWC, and you can get to them with ewcpro.com. Hey, don't forget to follow us on all your social media, like us on Facebook, subscribe and share on YouTube, and check us out on all your social media platforms. Don't forget to watch Remodel Revolution on your smart TV, on Texas Weather Tracker TV, on Roku, Android, Apple, and Amazon TV, Sundays at 1 and 3 p.m. Central Standard Time.